Okay, I'm gonna put together the nose pod on the Eternity. This guy here, and I've already done my light model. So first thing we're gonna start with are the harnesses for the wings. They come pre-made for you, so that's really nice, but there's a little bit of work that has to be done. You can see there's these little steps on the Dean's connectors, and if you try to put it into the slot there, it won't go all the way through, which is okay. You could try to come in from behind and get them in, but that's really tricky. I'm gonna avoid that. So all I've done is just ground those little tabs off and really scuffed up the connector with some coarse grit sandpaper just to get it ready for bonding. So I'll just show you real quick what that looks like here. Okay, so that got rid of that step, and then I'm just going to take some sandpaper like this and just scuff up the rest of this guy on all sides, just so when we epoxy it in, it's got a really good surface to bite to bond to. You get the general idea. And then I like to make some nice gouges with my X-Acto, because this Dean's connector, the plastic's kind of soft and slippery, I guess that's a good way to describe it. So the more you rough it up, the better. There we go. So that's ready. And one thing I'd recommend is test fit the joiner through the fuselage, and you want to make sure that there's a little bit of slop. See how that wiggles? There's a little bit of slop on both sides in all directions. That's going to allow the wing to fit nicer, and the wing's really going to get held in place with the alignment pins, so a little bit of slop here will just let everything mate up easier. Now I'm just going to take a file and just lightly stuff the bonding areas here. For our connectors. And what I'm also going to do is come in from the joiner pocket, and I'm going to use the tip of the file and scratch up around that hole from the inside Again, we're just trying to get a good bonding surface. Okay, next thing I am going to do, or actually I already did, is I got a little bit of this mold release wax that I always use, and I just wiped some basically around the plug, kind of up over the top of the fuse and below, just kind of in general all over, just because we're going to put epoxy there and it will stick, so using the wax is just the easy method of getting it off quickly without having to worry about taping things up or being super careful with the wax. And then I'm just going to take this file and just go over things again, just in case I got some wax in there. It'll knock it out like that, so that's pretty good. Now get some rubbing alcohol. On a Q-tip, and I'm just gonna clean out the holes, and also on the inside where we're going to do some work with epoxy, just to give the resin as good a chance as possible for a nice bond. Okay, I did go ahead and I put a piece of shrink tubing over the wire, and you can see it's still loose, which is fine. And I'm going to use this to actually secure the harness kind of like in the inside of the fuselage here, so that when we put our joiner in, we won't be pushing up against these wires or having to move these wires out of the way constantly. So both of these have that same piece of shrink tube on there. So same thing with the center panel. I'm just going to wipe a little bit of this mold release kind of on the top surface, on the bottom surface, right where the Dean's plug is, and then I will go ahead and go on the sides of it. If I get it on the plugs, I'm not concerned. I can clean that off, no problem. Just go all the way around. Just like that, and then we can come back and kind of wipe down the pins, clean those up a little bit. So go ahead and do that on both center panels. Okay, before I actually mix up glue and do something stupid, I'm gonna just test fit all the parts. Just make sure everything goes together. So we'll put the harnesses in. Okay, plug in the Dean's connector. Okay, and let's just see if everything fits. And it's looking like we got a pretty good fit, so pretty satisfied. We could just go ahead and get those Dean's plugs epoxied in. Alright, I have my usual epoxy mix going here, and we're about ready to epoxy up the Dean's plug, so I'm just going to pull one wing out, and I'm going to make sure that this Dean's plug is as well seated as I can get it on the wing. Okay. And I have just a little carbon stick remnant. I'm going to go ahead and just put some epoxy on the Dean's plug. I'm not going to put a whole lot on the side with the joiner. I'll go back and get that afterwards. We're going to have to go back and kind of fill in from the back side once this is cured. Do the other side as well. We'll flip it over. Get a little bit on the top. Alright, that should be pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and squeeze these guys together. You want to squeeze from the on top of the joiners. That's the strongest part. We have some oozage, which is okay. So just double check that everything is well seated. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that, so I'm just going to go ahead and put this aside and let it cure. Alright, so this again is the light pod that I finished, and my receiver is right here. You can kind of see it down there. And there's a wire harness going back all the way. and there's this Dean's connector here, and this is what attaches to the boom. So that's what we're gonna have to make. And I got some servo wire. This is a 26 gauge, I believe, and I used a lighter gauge on the lighter plane. I used 28 gauge, but since this is the strong plane, I'm gonna go with this 26. And so this basically, if I zoom out, it goes from about there to there. So when it's plugged into the receiver, it'll be like that, and it'll have enough excess here to grab hold of. Okay, so you need this, and then you're gonna need another signal strand. So that's what this is. I just got another piece of this wire and peeled off just the yellow part to make a signal wire, and it's the same length. And you're gonna need a 4-pin Dean's plug. Now you're gonna have to buy a few of these to complete the kit with the wings and everything else. That actually didn't with the planes I got, he didn't include enough to finish the model. So I'm gonna go ahead and solder up the wire to the Dean's plug. Okay, I got the Dean's plug soldered up here, and I put a big piece around everything just to protect it, and this is what the rest of it looks like. Put some small pieces to keep the bundle together, and now I'm going to crimp on the servo connectors on the ends here. Okay, and here's the harness completely finished. So we have 2 leads here, and one is just a signal. So the servos share the positive and negative. And then the Dean's plug. The epoxy is fully cured overnight, so let's try to get these panels apart. Hopefully we didn't glue everything together. This one's coming off quite nicely. There we go. So that's what we got left here. Now we are going to go back through the joiner box and apply more epoxy on the back side, but for now we can clean up some of this excess material here. And it just flakes off with your fingers. And then if you want, take like a straight razor and just clean it up even more. And if there's any epoxy kind of in the connector itself, you can just try to pick it out, and it should just pop out like that. I did have a problem with my light model. After I got it all built, one of the wing connections was intermittent, and Thought I might have had a wiring problem or something, but it just turned out that the pins on the center panel had some wax on them, and I just cleaned them off with like a Scotch-Brite pad, like a little bit of wire, and it fixed it up, no problem. So just keep that in mind. And we'll just go ahead and finish up the other side too. Alright, remember we put the heat shrink tubing over the wire. I don't know if you can see this in here, but I've tacked that piece of heat shrink tubing to the side of the fuselage with just one drop of CA. Let me see if I can get some kind of light in here to show you better. See it in there? And same with the other side. And that just keeps the wires clear of the joiner box, so that when you go to slide the joiner in, you're not messing with these wires. Okay, the next thing I'm gonna do is I've 3D printed a template for the Reisenauer gearbox, and I'm gonna use this as a guide, basically, to help drill the motor mount that came with the kit. All right, here's what the mount came out looking like after I used my little template, which worked perfectly. My holes are pretty accurate, and I have I have countersunk them for the 2.5mm bolts that are supplied by Reisenauer. So very happy with that. I would recommend that you do this on a drill press if you have one, and start with like maybe a small center punch, and then a 1.5mm bit, and then 2.5mm, and then come back and countersink it slightly for your screws. So the next thing we're going to do is prep this for bonding into the fuse, and while we have epoxy mixed up, we will finish off the Dean's connectors and apply some epoxy on the back side of those. Okay, so I am going to do a little work on the inside of the nose here to just scuff it in preparation for bonding. On the other two lighter models I had, there were a few little like bumps that kind of held up the motor mount from going in nicely, so I had to grind this edge down basically so it was even all the way around. This one is pretty good. I don't need to do much work on it, so I'm just going to get my Dremel with the cutoff wheel here and just go around it real lightly. And that should be all we need. And now I'm going to clean up the inside with some alcohol. By the way, I recently found these makeup remover pads online. I think Amazon. There's like a sleeve of 100 of them for just a couple of bucks, really cheap. So now I'm kind of using them on a daily basis instead of burning through paper towels. We'll just clean this out. And one final thing I'm going to do is wrap the nose with masking tape just to protect it from any epoxy that might seep out. So I have a brand new X-Acto knife blade and I've wrapped the tape on here real tight. So I'm going to go ahead and just trim this back as nicely as I can. Like that. And then we can mix up some resin and get that motor mount installed. One little trick I'm going to show you is, if you notice when you put the mount in here, it's slightly loose. So it's not like an extremely tight fit in here. So I'm going to help this out and get it a nicer, tighter fit, and I'm going to do that by wrapping some small carbon tow around this mount, and this will actually strengthen the nose and take up some of that gap and get us a nicer bond when we glue this in. So here's what we have with the carbon wrapped around the motor mount, and I just used some tiny slivers of masking tape to hold the ends so it won't unravel. And that masking tape can just live there, it can be there permanently, I don't really care. And this front area is going to be the major bonding portion. So when I mix up my epoxy, typically I will thicken it to mount these motor mounts, but before I add the thickener, I'm gonna mix it up really well, and before I add the thickener, I'm just gonna saturate the carbon out with the normal unthickened epoxy, just so we can ensure that all that carbon is thoroughly wetted out. Then I'll put the thickener in the epoxy and put some in the fuselage and bond this in. I have my epoxy mixed up, mixed it really well. And I have the mount sitting on this microballoons bottle just to hold it, just to give me something to work with. And I'm going to go ahead and use this acid brush and just get some of this epoxy on the carbon. I'm using the same epoxy I always use. I believe it's the poly epoxy. I highly recommend it. Or I think for a little bit more money you get MGS epoxy, which is probably a little better than this poly epoxy, but it's kind of pricey. Okay, so now we'll add the thickener to the epoxy. I have a little piece of scrap carbon, and before I mount the motor mount, I'm going to go in from the back side here and secure these Dean's plugs a little more permanently. Just applying the same epoxy that's thickened. Just trying to get a little bead of it around the back side of those connectors. Can't really get all the way around them, but you can get enough on to make sure you have a really nice, secure connector. Flip it around and we'll do the other side. If you get any on the wires or in the joiner area, you just use paper towel or a Q-tip with some rubbing alcohol and just wipe it off. No big deal. Even if you get it on the outside. Whenever I'm doing something like this, I always have something with rubbing alcohol on it by me to wipe things down, and also my fingers if I happen to get anything on my fingers. Alright, I'm going to call that good. So now we'll apply some to the nose. Again, I'm going to wipe down my fingers. And we'll put a little layer. You don't want to just pile it in here because if you put a lot, it'll end up getting on the inside of the motor mount where your motor bolts to, and that will give you all kinds of problems when you go to install your motor. So you don't need tons of this stuff, but you need enough to fill the gap, you know. And usually the fuselage is tapered and the motor mount is not, so I never really bothered trying to bond the entire motor mount. I just want to get like the first 50% of it. It's kind of what I shoot for. And it's going to be plenty strong enough if you prep everything correctly like I showed you. If you're using a motor mount that is not knurled like the one we're using here, really scuff up the surface that you're bonding to on the motor mount. You know, scuff it up with really coarse sandpaper, and maybe even use a Dremel tool with the cutoff wheel and cut some little divots and notches in it. And then that way you know it won't ever come out. Okay, I'm pretty happy with this. Now we're gonna try to get that mount on there. It could be a little tricky. So I'm just gonna use the bottle that I made to help me out here. Just like that. And I need to wipe down my fingers again. And I'm gonna, this is really of no use whatsoever, but I like to line up on the Eisenhower pattern. I like to line up the top hole with the seam of the fuselage. Doesn't serve any purpose whatsoever, except I just don't like randomly placed things, I guess. So that's looking good. Okay, I'm gonna push this in, and then I'm gonna get a fresh pad here, put some alcohol on it. I go through rubbing alcohol like crazy. And I'm just gonna wipe down a little bit. Okay, now I'm going to use masking tape to start securing the mount put one over the top or vertically. I'm not going to pull super tight yet. This, and get another piece. And we'll go kind of cross perpendicular. The first piece we put on. Again, I'm not pulling super tight yet. I'm just kind of using these to get it in place. Okay, and then I'm going to push these down on this edge, on the fuselage. And now I'm going to get another piece, and I'm going to go across the back of that tape. That'll really secure those pieces. Okay, now we can start kind of pulling harder. So I'm going to go at a 45 like that, and then I'm going to pull pretty hard. And do the same thing. Get another piece. I'm going to go perpendicular to that one I just put on. And I'm going to pull pretty hard. Okay, and then again, probably overkill, but I like doing it this way. I'm going to put a piece on the back side, pull that pretty hard. There we go. So all we have to do now is just let this cure at least overnight, 8 or 10 hours. Alright, well, my motor mount is installed and all the epoxy is fully cured, so very happy with that. And what I've also done is installed my little antenna exits. So I drilled some holes here and installed these little 3D printed guides for my antenna, and therefore they are for my JR antennas, which have these aluminum sleeves or bodas on them, so they're a little bit more clumsy than other antennas. So that's ready to go, and then the next thing I've done is kind of prepared my motor speed control unit. So this is my strong plane, so I'm using this 10-shock 1515. This is a 15 turn with the Eisenhower 5:1 micro edition gearbox, and I have a Castle Talon 60, which I really like for strong planes. And you can see that I've basically bundled up the speed control really close to the motor, so it's basically right on the back edge of the motor. And I've just used some shrink tubing to keep these wires together. And these are two pieces of double-sided tape, which I'm actually not going to pull the backing off of. I just put these on here to protect the speed control from any rubbing and chafing that might happen in flight or in use. So that's just a kind of a protective thing. I don't think I'll tape the speed control down. It's pretty firm behind the motor, so it'll just sit there. So that's basically it for the motor. I'm going to go ahead and install this into the fuse, and then I'm going to get to the receiver and install that. Alright, so I've got all the wires plugged into my receiver, and I marked all the plastic housings on the connectors with, you know, like left flap, right flap, left tail, right tail, and all that. So that's all good to go. I've bound the receiver to my radio, and what you see here is just this 3D printed little pad that matches the bottom of the contour of the fuselage, and that's double-sided tape to the receiver. Then I have a piece of double-sided tape on that, and I'll put the receiver back here. I'll install it back here, and we get the speed control up here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and try to just kind of get the wires, the wiring a little bit neater. Finally got this figured out. I have the receiver installed back here, and the Altus, the altitude device, is right there. It'll just kind of sit right there. And you can see how the antennas work in those 3D printed mounts. And I have the extension from the speed control to the Altus. This part is wrapped in tape, and it's double-sided tape to the fuselage, and the wire over here has a bit of double-sided tape on it too, and then there's a bit of Velcro in here, and the battery. This is the exact same way I have my light Eternity set up as well. It's been working for me, but the battery just goes in there like that, and the wires tuck in alongside like that, and it works pretty well. I use these sort of flat packs, but if you had a more squarish pack, it might work out better for you. But I've had good luck with these batteries. So that's about it. That wraps up the nose pod or the fuselage build. Obviously, this needs a prop and spinner, but I'm not going to do that until I program the plane and get it all set up. That's the last thing I'll do. I also have to CG the plane as well and fine-tune that a little bit. But other than that, she's all basically done. Back here I have the that pigtail hanging out that connects to the boom. Then we have the connectors glued in like that. And then when I need to transport this, I can just pull these antennas out pretty easily. Well, not easily if I'm trying to do it one-handed, but you can see they come out like that. And then I can just put the canopy on and transport the model and pack it up in the case or whatever. So that's it. Hope this helped you out. Probably some of this stuff applies to other models as well. And I will see you guys in the next video.